You know that moment when you have something important to do, but somehow doing nothing feels easier? Oh, you tell yourself you're lazy. You promise you'll start in 5 minutes. Then 5 minutes becomes an hour. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes what looks like laziness is actually something happening underneath. Your brain may not be saying, I don't want to work. It may be saying, this feels too difficult, uncertain, or uncomfortable. Your brain naturally notices the easier reward first. Comfort is immediate. The benefit of hard work is usually somewhere in the future. That is why scrolling, watching videos, or checking your phone can feel strangely irresistible when a difficult task is waiting. And the more you avoid the task, the more uncomfortable it becomes. Then avoidance creates guilt. Guilt creates more avoidance. Eventually, the task doesn't just feel difficult. It feels huge. And when something feels huge, your brain becomes even more likely to avoid it. So maybe the answer isn't to become a completely different person overnight. Maybe you simply need to make the first step feel smaller. Because sometimes beating laziness isn't about forcing yourself to work harder. It's about understanding what your brain is trying to avoid. Think about the last thing you kept postponing. Was the task itself really unbearable, or was it the feeling you expected to experience while doing it? Maybe it was boredom, maybe fear of failure, maybe confusion about where to begin. Your brain doesn't just avoid effort. It often avoids the emotional discomfort attached to that effort. And then your brain discovers an escape. Something easier, something instantly rewarding, something that makes the uncomfortable feeling disappear. This creates a simple psychological battle, immediate comfort versus delayed reward. And your brain often favors what feels good right now. The problem is that immediate comfort disappears quickly, but the habit of choosing it can become stronger every time you repeat it. That's how avoidance becomes a cycle. Task, discomfort, escape, relief, and then the cycle starts again. And here's the trap. Every time you escape, you feel better for a moment. That tiny relief teaches your brain, avoiding this works. So the real enemy may not be laziness at all. It may be a learned pattern of escaping discomfort. And once you understand that, the goal changes. You don't need to fight yourself. You need to train yourself to stay when discomfort appears. Most people make one huge mistake with motivation. They wait for it to arrive before they begin. You think, when I feel motivated, I'll start. But motivation doesn't always come first. Very often, action comes first. Then you see progress, and that progress creates motivation. You don't need to feel inspired to begin. Sometimes you just need to begin small enough that your brain stops resisting. One tiny action can create momentum. 5 minutes of effort can become 10. 10 can become 30. And suddenly, the task that felt impossible starts feeling manageable. Not because you changed overnight, but because resistance weakened. This is why discipline matters. Discipline means acting without demanding that your emotions give you permission first. You don't build consistency by feeling motivated every day. You build it by repeatedly showing up, especially on the days you don't feel like it. Every time you keep a small promise to yourself, you're teaching your brain something important. I can rely on me. And that may be the real secret. Stop waiting to become motivated. Start acting in a way that gives your future self a reason to become motivated. But there is another layer to laziness that people often miss. Sometimes, it isn't about effort at all. It's about emotion. Fear of failing, fear of being judged, or even fear of discovering that you're not as capable as you hoped. Sometimes avoiding the task protects your ego. If you never try, you never have to discover whether you might fail. It's strangely comforting to say, I didn't try, rather than risk saying, I tried and wasn't good enough. So what looks like laziness can sometimes be your mind trying to protect you from discomfort, disappointment, or embarrassment. Your brain is built to reduce threats, even emotional ones. And sometimes, protecting yourself becomes more important than progressing. And when fear, pressure, and perfectionism get tangled together, the simplest response can feel like doing nothing. This is where perfectionism can become dangerous. If the standard is impossible, starting can feel pointless. Progress begins when you stop demanding perfection before you've even started. Once you understand what your laziness is protecting you from, you can finally choose a different response. Comfort feels harmless. That's what makes it so powerful. Every time you choose the easier option, your brain gets a tiny reward, relief. And your brain learns from rewards. If avoiding something makes you feel better immediately, avoidance becomes easier to repeat. That's how comfort becomes a trap. You escape discomfort today, but create more discomfort for tomorrow. Tomorrow's problem becomes bigger because today's avoidance quietly adds another layer. The easier choice isn't always the easier life. Sometimes the uncomfortable choice is what makes everything easier later. Growth often feels uncomfortable precisely because you're doing something your old habits weren't designed for. The goal isn't to eliminate discomfort. It's to stop treating discomfort as a signal to run away. You can choose comfort now and carry the problem forward, or choose discomfort now and carry the pride forward. And every time you choose the harder right thing, you weaken the comfort trap and strengthen your ability to act. Sometimes you aren't fighting laziness. You're fighting an environment designed to distract you. If distraction is always within reach, your brain doesn't have to work very hard to choose it. Your surroundings constantly give your brain cues about what to do next. So instead of relying entirely on willpower, change the environment that keeps triggering the behavior. Make the good behavior easier to start. Make the distracting behavior slightly harder to reach. Your goal isn't to become a machine with unlimited discipline. It's to remove unnecessary battles. Small environmental changes create fewer decisions, and fewer decisions mean less mental resistance. Your brain is constantly responding to cues around you, often before you consciously realize it. Make your desired action visible, obvious, and ready. Make your distractions inconvenient. When the right choice becomes the easy choice, you don't need to fight yourself nearly as much. But there's one more trap that can make laziness feel permanent: turning a behavior into an identity. If you repeatedly tell yourself, "I'm lazy," your brain can start treating that statement like a description of who you are. But there's a huge difference between saying, "I am lazy," and saying, "I avoided this task." One describes your entire identity. The other describes one behavior. Behaviors can change. Once you stop labeling yourself, you create room to experiment, improve, and become someone different. Every small action gives you evidence that the old story about yourself isn't completely true. You don't need to prove that you're suddenly disciplined forever. You only need to prove what you can do today. Instead of asking, "Am I lazy?" ask a better question. What kind of person am I practicing becoming? Identity changes through repeated evidence. Small promises kept today become confidence tomorrow. Maybe you're not a lazy person. Maybe you're simply a person who has practiced avoidance for too long, and practice can be changed. Now you know the pattern. Something feels difficult. You avoid it. You feel temporary relief, and then the guilt brings you back to the beginning. The first step is surprisingly simple. Notice the moment you are about to escape. Don't immediately obey the urge. Just notice it. "I'm feeling resistance right now." Then make a deal with yourself. Just 5 minutes. Not the entire task. Just 5 minutes. Break overwhelming tasks into pieces so small that your brain has almost nothing to argue with. Then remove the easiest escape route. Put the distraction somewhere you can't reach automatically. Then repeat. One small action today is more powerful than a huge plan you never start, because every repetition changes the pattern. And eventually, the behavior that once felt difficult starts feeling normal. You don't break the cycle by becoming more motivated. You break it by interrupting it, one small choice at a time. Maybe you've been waiting for the moment when everything suddenly becomes easy. The moment when you finally feel disciplined, motivated, focused, ready. But what if that moment never comes? What if waiting to feel ready is exactly what keeps you stuck? Waiting creates hesitation. Hesitation creates avoidance. Avoidance creates guilt. And guilt makes you wait for motivation all over again. The breakthrough begins when you stop asking, "Do I feel like doing this?" Instead, ask, "What would the person I want to become do next?" Maybe the answer is to work for 5 minutes. Maybe it's to open the book. Maybe it's simply to take the first step. You don't need confidence before action. Sometimes confidence is what action gives you afterward. Every time you act despite resistance, you collect evidence that you are capable of acting despite resistance. And that is the breakthrough. You don't have to feel ready to move. You move, and readiness slowly catches up. So the next time you call yourself lazy, pause for a second and ask a better question. What am I actually avoiding? Is the task too big? Too boring? Are you afraid of failing? Or is something around you constantly pulling your attention away? Don't make discipline harder than it needs to be. Design your environment so the right action becomes easier. Give yourself permission to start ridiculously small. 5 minutes is enough to break the wall between intention and action. Then repeat. Not perfectly, not dramatically, just consistently. Because eventually, you stop seeing yourself as someone who is always trying to change and start seeing yourself as someone who simply shows up. You realize the goal was never to become perfectly motivated. It was to become someone you can trust. So maybe you're not lazy. Maybe you've been caught in a cycle of avoidance, comfort, fear, and waiting. And the moment you understand that, you stop asking, how do I become less lazy? You start asking, what is one small thing I can do right now? Start there. Then do it again tomorrow. Because your life doesn't change when you finally feel ready. It changes when you choose to move anyway.